And often just in doing that, we surface a couple of things where we're like, oh, have you considered using Flow for this? So um, yeah, I think it really helps having an external third party look at some of the processes with a bit of an eye to what can be automated,
Right.
and sort of advocating, hey, did you know you can do this
Right.
much more easily?
Right. And we're live. Gavin, how you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. We've had some technical issues here on the recording, but I think we're in good shape. It's really cool to finally chat with you. We're going to dig into Shopify Flow and some of the interesting stuff that you guys do there at Disco Labs. How do you introduce yourself when you're talking to potential clients, merchants? What type of work do you guys focus on?
Yeah, so we're a Shopify Plus focused agency, and we're also really focused on custom app development for merchants. So we don't do design, we don't do marketing, we don't do theme dev or anything like that. We're purely focused on the sort of the back end thing. So building systems to help merchants hook their Shopify stores up to other systems or develop bespoke features for their customers, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes you guys, pretty unique because a lot of, yeah, I kind of come from the Magento world, and a lot of what makes Shopify unique is there's a lot of the back end stuff that you don't have to worry about as much that's handled really well. But I think I remember when I saw your site recently, and it's like you're like a back end focused agency, and I think you might be. Are you guys like the only one in that category? I think you might be.
As far as I know, we're kind of the only ones that are sort of very exclusively focused on that. So there are lots of other Shopify agencies that sort of aim to offer the whole kit and caboodle. And there's certainly lots of great agencies out there that can do app development as well. But I think we're the only ones that are sort of just exclusively focused on that. And so like our team is very deep knowledge just on the app dev stuff. And
Yeah.
we found that to be pretty good. And it also means that we actually get to partner with and work with a lot of other agencies that have amazing design skills, amazing front end dev skills, but maybe just don't have the app development in house. And so we get to partner with them and work with them. So we get to work with a lot of different projects, different agencies, which is
Right.
really nice.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I was talking to a buddy of mine that's done some work with you guys and on their checkout and doing like a native subscriptions via like a native checkout before all of the new stuff that's been released with the checkout API. And you guys had some unique ways of making that work. And so we wanted to dig into a bunch of different interesting Shopify Flow use cases that you guys have done. So we can jump into a screen share whenever you want or kind of stay high level, but I know you had a number of kind of interesting use cases around Flow.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I can touch first on the site that you're talking about with the custom subscription stuff, and then we can dive into Flow a little bit. So because we've been working with Shopify Plus merchants for quite a few years, we've seen some of their pain points, and one of the big ones for a number of years has been a lack of subscription support natively inside of Shopify. So you've got
Right.
your apps that do or did that and still do recharge, bulk subscriptions, that sort of stuff, but they took you out to an external checkout. So Shopify has obviously been really keen to get everything back into the native Shopify checkout. But some of the work we were doing with clients, one of our clients here in Australia, UFoods, who's a food delivery service, who they deliver a box of meals to your doorstep every couple of weeks. Obviously, subscription for them was a really big part of their business, but using an external checkout really wasn't an option. So it was, I think, about 4 years ago, we actually built a native subscription solution for them using the Shopify checkout. And as soon as we built that, we had a bunch of other Plus merchants coming to us saying, "Hey, we really want that." And that's when we started work on Submarine, which is our bespoke platform for tokenized subscriptions, upsells, that sort of stuff. So designed very specifically at Shopify Plus merchants, and that sort of released a couple of years ago ahead of Shopify adding its own native subscription support with its new subscription APIs, which is great. It's going to make that native checkout experience available to a lot more merchants in the space, which is really nice. Where we sit is probably more for the merchants that have bespoke needs that aren't going to be met by those subscription APIs. They need to use a different payment processor, or they need a really custom flow, or they need to import tokens from an external system, something like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so as part of building that app, we made a decision early on that because we were just targeting Shopify Plus merchants, we would leverage as much Shopify Plus stuff as possible. And one of those things is Shopify Flow. So they're Shopify Plus's automation tool, which has a really nice workflow builder, hooks into a lot of key Shopify features and events and data and that sort of stuff. And we can have a look at that in a second. But we made the decision that because that tool is there, rather than our app doing a bunch of the work that we might otherwise be doing. So, for example, sending an email to a customer when their subscription's about to happen, we actually just plug directly into Shopify Flow. And then that gives our merchants the ability to add their own custom logic inside of Flow to decide when we're actually going to send this email out. But it also allows them to plug it into different email systems. So whether they're using Klaviyo or .mailer or something like that, both of those Shopify apps have Shopify Flow connectors, so you can plug into those, and people can use their existing email systems without us having to rebuild that. So we've actually found that a really nice way to cut down the development work on our side when we're working with Plus merchants, while giving them the option of keeping their existing tools and making things just hook up and play nicely. So that's been really nice from a dev perspective. The Shopify Flow integration. And so that probably leads us into Shopify Flow itself, which I don't know if your audience wants the elevator pitch on Flow, or if you think they're all pretty well across it by now.
Actually, well, real quick, how did you do the subscription tokenized stuff in the native checkout? Like high level, like how did that work?
So because we've been around the Shopify ecosystem for a while, I started working I think it is a decade ago now, which is kind of scary, but we worked with a number of payment gateway integrations. And so Submarine, the app, is a combination of its own payment gateway, which we customize and for the merchant inside of the checkout, which again is something that's only available for Shopify Plus merchants, and then an app on the back end. So customers are still going through the native Shopify checkout. It plays nicely with other Shopify payment methods. So we have merchants that use Shopify payments for all of their one-time purchases, but they'll swap over to us when they need to use subscription payments and things like that. Super high level.
So is it just like on the product level, like you'll have a product has an attribute on it that the system knows it's a monthly recurring, it's a subscription product, and then in the checkout, you'll have some logic to determine which payment method to use based on kind of the cart details?
Yeah, pretty much exactly. Because Submarine's a pretty bespoke solution, we're working directly with the merchants themselves to implement it, often with agencies that are doing all of their front-end design and dev. And so that means that if the merchant wants to manage whether products are subscription products or not, with tags or with metadata, or they want everything to be subscribable, all of that is pretty doable. It's a very flexible system, and really at the start of a project, we sit down with the merchant, we say, hey, what's going to be easiest for you? What do you want your business logic to be? And then because it's a bespoke sort of thing, then we can customize it for them specifically. So it means it's not a one-click install sort of solution, but again, there's going to be a lot of one-click solutions for subscription stuff for merchants, especially with the new APIs. So we're really focused on those edge cases for large merchants. Yeah.
Right. Nice. Yeah. Nice. All right. So elevator pitch for Flow. Let's get that going.
Yeah. automation tool, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. And I think that's something that's becoming a lot more common across e-commerce platforms, software in general, really. So giving people the ability to customize workflows within a tool that doesn't require coding knowledge or anything like that, and just take some of those regular tasks off the plate for people who are using it or doing something that's sort of bespoke business logic for you. So Shopify, I mean, I think
no code,
no
code
the
movement.
dream of no code. Yeah, I mean, as a developer, no code sounds scary to me, but I think there's plenty of code involved in making no code work, and it is. I think it's about hitting the low hanging fruit. You know, the stuff that you want merchants to be able to do for themselves, rather than having to come to you every time they want to set up a little task or automate something. And it lets developers focus on bigger impacts, more leverage sort of stuff. So I think it's a win all round for everyone. So Shopify Flow's Shopify's addition to that kind of concept. It's a workflow tool, visual builder to say, if this happens, then do this thing. So pretty similar to what a lot of other tools have these days. It's available only for Shopify Plus merchants, so it's sort of targeted at those large merchants, and is one of the offerings that Plus has over the other platforms. And then there are also some for other merchants, they aren't necessarily left out in the cold in the Shopify world. There are a number of other third-party apps that offer automation stuff. Some of them are sort of more targeted towards developers. Others are sort of trying to essentially replicate a sort of graphical workflow tool like Flow, but for all Shopify merchants. So it's something that's available in one form or another to everyone on the Shopify platform.
Yeah, one question I have, and it might make sense to answer this as we get into some of the specific nuts and bolts of the examples, or it might make sense more on a higher level. But like when you look at the overall landscape of some of these options for automation, there's Flow, there's Mesa, Mechanic, Alloy, which I saw recently. What are like some of the strengths and weaknesses of each? Are there are there gaps in what Flow can do where another product can fill that? Like, what's kind of the overall like overview of all these different options out there?
Yeah. So I'll speak to the ones that I know the best first, and then we can touch on the other ones. But the two sort of automation tasks apps that I would say are my go-to for non-Plus stores are Mechanic, which is a really thorough app that lets you build workflow automation stuff, and then Arigato is another one. So Mechanic is very developer focused. They do give you a lot of sort of out-of-the-box workflows, but the way that you actually implement all of it is by writing liquid code. For some merchants who may be a little more technical and are comfortable already with like editing their theme in Shopify and doing some basic theme stuff, it may be accessible. But I think its target market is super or technical teams for merchants and or agencies or freelancers working with those merchants and building out those flows. But it is a really powerful tool for that, but it's definitely more technically focused. Arigato is sort of like Shopify Flow for non-Plus merchants. It's got a similar graphical interface where you have trigger events and you can set up some logic for your workflows and plug that into other things. And it's pretty well featured. It probably covers a significant amount of what Flow has for Plus merchants. Once you're a Plus merchant, I think you've got Flow there for free, so probably would lean towards using that rather than a third-party tool. But for merchants where that's not an option, then I think Arigato is really, really handy. And both of those tools are very Shopify focused. And the other two that you mentioned, Alloy and Mesa. So Alloy is more of a general e-commerce automation tool. So it's certainly not focused just on Shopify, but it is focused on the e-commerce domain. And again, it sits outside of Shopify. Shopify is one of its inputs and outputs. But yeah, definitely has a really nice interface for putting together that those sorts of workflows and plugging into other external systems. So I think if Shopify was a smaller part of a larger e-commerce operation, then Ally certainly looks like it'd be a good tool to sort of bridge the gap between all of those different systems. And then Mesa, I have to say, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it again, I think looks a bit like Zapier for e-commerce and Shopify in particular, where you have some predefined tasks and operations, and you can plug them into Shopify and then your external systems. So I guess they're all, at the end of the day, trying to get something, or trying to achieve the same thing. I think it's the target market and the target use cases slightly differ. So yeah, I'd say Mechanic and Mesa are sort of more focused towards the technical teams and devs, whereas Alloy and Arigato are sort of more out of the box. I'm a merchant who's savvy but not a coder, so I can put that sort of stuff together myself.
Right. Nice. All right, cool. Well, yeah, man, let's jump into some of these use cases.
Yeah, sure. So I will just share my screen with you, and we can see what Flow actually looks like in the flesh.
This is actually the first time I've seen, other than like some rough screenshots back from like a long time ago. So I'm excited.
Cool. All right. We'll give you the quick tour. So this is our Shopify
my spectacles here.
The Shopify admin, Shopify Flow is installed and operates just like any other app on a Shopify Plus store. So you get it into the app section, and you open up Flow, and Flow has a bunch of workflows that you define. So to perform different actions, and you'll see what that is a bit more concretely in a second. Then one of the useful things that Shopify Flow does have, it has a built-in templates tool. So they have a whole bunch of existing templates that other people have created that do common actions. So just scrolling through that, you can sort of get a sense of what they are. And they include not only Shopify-focused actions. For example, this one here, prompting customer reach out for high-value returns. So that'll be a workflow that will be looking at returns that are coming in and then sending out an email to your staff member to flag, hey, this was a high value return. Right. You might want to look into that. So that's.
By the way, just sorry, real quick. Could you bump up your font size a little bit,
sure.
just in case people are like looking at this on their phone or something like that?
Is that a bit better?
See a little better. Yeah, that's definitely a little better.
Great.
Awesome. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So that's a very internal to Shopify sort of action. But then one of the nice things about Flow is that as a Shopify app developer, you can build a Shopify Flow connector into your app. And then from the second that you've done that, inside of Shopify Flow, the actions and the triggers that your app exposes will be visible in that workflow builder. So it does make it really easy to plug your two apps that may not talk to each other together with a sort of, I guess, Flow in that case is working as kind of a standardized interface between two apps without those two apps necessarily having to actually coordinate or know anything about each other. And as a result, you can see these apps that, or these Flow workflow templates that are using third-party apps. So example, the one I have my mouse over at the moment, Push Out, which is a push notification app. They've built a template to say when a Launchpad sales event begins. So that's a Shopify Plus feature where you can schedule a product launching. You can also automatically push a series of push notifications out to everyone else with Push Out. So that template stuff is certainly handy for merchants who install Flow for the first time, and they might be wondering, okay, what are some of the things that I can do to save myself time? So you can take a look through this and get some ideas pretty quickly.
Yeah.
so that's the templates part, and then the connectors. What I was talking about before, apps that you have installed into your Shopify store that support Shopify Flow will show up in here. You can see there's a couple of ones out of the box that Shopify Flow supports, so Slack, Trello, Google Sheets, Asana, and then any app that you install that supports the Flow connectors will show up there as well. And there's actually in the Shopify App Store, there's a collection which shows you all of the apps that support Flow. So always, if you're a Plus merchant, you're tossing up between two apps. Always a good thing to think about is, does it support Flow, and might I want to look at automating things in there? So that's quite handy.
And by the way, to be included in that list, do they have to be part of that certified or a verified Shopify Plus apps, or is that just a totally separate thing?
Yeah, I don't believe so. I think any app that has a Plus connector, a Shopify Flow connector, can flag that with the Shopify app team and be included in that collection.
Nice.
So I don't think it needs to be a Plus certified app.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess getting back to the workflows, which is the core of what Shopify Flow is, we can take a look at some of the workflows. I've just got some of them open here. So this is what Shopify Flow looks like. Again, I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see that a bit better. So you've got your workspace here where you can create your Flow workflows. All workflows start with a trigger event, so you can select. In fact, it might make more sense if I actually start from scratch and show you a blank one.
Do it live.
Yeah, always scary doing anything live. So that's why I have the ones I prepared earlier. But all workflows start with a trigger action. So something happens somewhere in your store or from an app, and you can, as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different events that can happen inside of Shopify. Actually, since opening this up this morning to prepare for this podcast, I noticed that they've added a couple of additional actions in here recently. So it's always good to know. An event happens, something happens, a customer gets created, and you then go into what I think a lot of you listeners would be familiar with, which is sort of a workflow where you can add conditions on things and then do things based on those conditions. So if the, let's say the customer, so say if the email includes, so maybe you want to check and see if anyone from Microsoft signs up for your website, then you can then perform an action. So potentially something on that customer itself, so add a tag or something like that, or perform an external action like sending an email. So you might want to get notified if anyone from Microsoft signs up to your site. And then you could also plug it into your external systems. So again, you could go straight to Slack, create a card in Trello. If it's potentially that's a lead or something like that, you can plug that into there. So that's the basic concept, and you can continue chaining these if conditions, add multiple conditions, and then perform multiple actions or different actions depending on the results of those logic gates. So that's the gist, I guess. I can step you through a couple of the examples that we've seen merchants use it for, and I think what we've found is that as soon as merchants start using it for one thing, they start to realize the usefulness of it in other areas of their business. So it definitely snowballs. So we have merchants that would have dozens, if not nearly 100 Flow workflows in production, doing a whole bunch of different stuff.
Wow. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about performance issues, scalability. It just, you could throw 100 of these suckers in there and it just works.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about Flow is that it's running on Shopify's infrastructure, so it is very tightly coupled with Shopify itself, which means the latency between the Shopify app or the platform itself and the Flow app is quite short. So we certainly haven't seen significant performance issues. And again, once you've set these flows up, they're sort of running in the background. So ideally, you don't actually have to think about them or be waiting on things to finish.
Do you think that for Plus merchants in general, Flow is sort of underutilized? Like, I was listening to a podcast and somebody was saying like, "Oh yeah, we're on Plus and we probably should be using Flow more," or something like that. And I kind of like, huh. I wonder if that's a general thing among a lot of Plus merchants, that obviously that haven't worked with you yet, because I'm sure once they work with you, then they're fired up on it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair comment. Like I said, I think once people start using it for some things, they start to see a lot of other places in the business or in their workflows that they can use it for. But there's also just, merchants are super busy. They've got a lot of things on their mind. So perhaps learning a new tool or even just taking the time to stop, take a step back and look at their current workflow processes. They're not doing that because they've got a whole bunch of other stuff to get done. So I think that it can be really useful, especially if you're a partner or a developer or a freelancer and you're working with a Plus merchant for the first time. So quite often what we'll do when we start working with someone is a bit of research into their workflow processes to really understand how the business works. And often just in doing that, we surface a couple of things where we're like, oh, have you considered using Flow for this? So, I think it really helps having an external third party look at some of the processes with a bit of an eye to what can be automated and sort of advocating, hey, did you know you can do this much more easily?
Right. What's your process for talking through, businesses' workflows and things like that? Do you just get on the phone and say, hey, tell me how you guys work? A lot of times people aren't even aware of all the things that are going on or that are inefficient, or like how do you go through that process?
Yeah, well, we do this pretty often in the context of building a custom app to support a merchant's flow. So a good example might be when we're looking at connecting two systems together, so Shopify and an external order management system, for example. The first thing we do is work out what problem we're actually trying to solve, and often it seems pretty obvious because we've got these orders in Shopify. You need to send these types of orders to this order management system, map it with these values being mapped, and then this set of orders to this other system with these set of values mapped. And so the scope of that problem might seem pretty straightforward at first, but I think rather than just sit down and go, okay, well, we need to get orders from Shopify to these external systems, and we know we need to build a connector and this and this, we will actually get the merchant to steps through, okay, what's the exact process you're using for this now? Show us on a screen step by step, and then start some questions along the way to be things like, I do an export of all the orders as a CSV from Shopify. I go through these, I apply this filter, and then those orders get copied across and sent over there. And as someone's actually stepping you through the process, there's often just a bunch of things that have built up over years of that process being the way that it gets done, without necessarily an eye to, why is that actually happening? And, why are you mapping that value to that when, in this external system, it actually supports the original value in Shopify. Just sitting down and asking the people that are doing the thing at the moment, how you're actually getting this done really helps with that a lot of the time.
Right. Nice. That's great.
Cool. Should we have a quick look at some of these example use cases? It'll be once you get the gist of what Flow is doing, it becomes pretty obvious. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but just some examples of some of the really common ones that we see merchants using that are, I guess, the low hanging fruit often. Things like low stock notifications. you can install an app to do that for you, but if you've got Flow, you can set something up really easily to do that you then have quite a lot of customization over. So when an inventory quantity changes for a product, then we just send an email to us letting us know what
This is
what
this
does.
is Oh, sorry. I would say this is one of the questions I have in general is the overlap with apps. And like I know, for example, there's like a loyalty program, kind of a use case. There's this one. Like and the question might be more relevant to like the loyalty program stuff, but so maybe I should have waited until then to get get into it. But like if somebody like if there's like this one makes sense as a standalone feature actually, but you mentioned like kind of the overlap with apps and like with the loyalty program one, which I think we're going to get into, is like why would somebody, it seems like, and I don't know that much about all of the loyalty apps for Shopify, but it seems like there's this rich ecosystem of loyalty apps, and I would think that they would want to use one of those and just have a full-fledged loyalty program. But like, what's the use case for wanting to do a simpler subset of functionality for things like that?
Yeah, I think the key word there is simpler. And I think a really good example. Let's skip to the loyalty
Yeah.
one. I'll just find it here. Look, there you go. First tab.
Hey.
Getting a bit big, but so this is how you could implement a really simple loyalty system inside of Shopify Flow, which is anytime an order gets paid, then we look at the total spend of that customer. If it's more than $100, we add a particular tag, which is bronze VIP. It happens to be more than that, then we add a silver VIP tag. That's it, really. So that logic will get applied, and you'll have your customers that are over time getting tagged with bronze and then silver VIP. And then on the front end perspective, you can be using the fact that customer has that tag to, for example, if you have a silver only collection of products, you can either use some theme customizations or potentially a tool like Locksmith, which can control what pages you can see based on tags. You could use those tools to make that an exclusive collection, or you could use Shopify scripts to give those VIP customers a 5% discount across the store. And so you could do all of that within just the Shopify platform itself and not have to rely on any third-party apps. So that's obviously it's a really simple way to get it up and running quickly. It doesn't have all of the features that you might have if you were using Loyalty Line or Smile or something like that. You're going to have to look at custom ways to handle redeeming points or things like that. But if you wanted to just, as a merchant, if you'd never had a loyalty program before and you wanted to find out if we offered one, what will the impact actually be? This is a way you could get one set up in 15 minutes and send out the marketing email and see what happens, rather than having to install, configure, pay for, and potentially integrate a full-blown loyalty app into your Shopify store and get that all set up and running. So I think there's a really strong argument for Flow if you just want to be prototyping something or just want to experiment with things. It's meant to be one of the advantages of a SaaS Shopify platform and the Shopify ecosystem in general, is just being able to get something up and running really quickly, prototype, experiment, iterate without having to spend a whole bunch of time on development. So I think Flow really fits in nicely there.
Quick kind of detailed question. When you're talking about if somebody wanted to go in and quickly segment out their customers and send out an email, I know this particular trigger is off of an order paid trigger. So that'll run on a continuous basis every time there's an order paid. But if I wanted to go in and run these segments against my entire existing customer base, is there a way to run it, like run all or some kind of a thing like that?
Not with Flow, and that's probably one of its limitations is around the nature of the actions that it can perform. So there's no way for it to look back at all your existing customers and go through and run that. So one of our sort of side products is a little, I guess you'd almost call it an expansion pack for Shopify Flow, which adds some additional features into Flow. And one of those is things like delayed time triggers. And then another one that we get quite often is, I've created this flow. I really want to be able to run this against every single customer.
Nice.
But you could also actually work your way around that a little bit, because if you were to, for example, if we change this to a no, I was thinking. So this was me thinking on the fly. But if there was a customer updated trigger, for example, you could start with the customer updated trigger, apply that logic in the tag, and then you could just do a bulk update of all your customers using the import export feature, and that would trigger the update. But they don't support customer.
So that explains why they don't have the customer update in there. It's probably would be trickier to implement.
Potentially, yeah. But yeah, so that sort of stuff is definitely it is one of the limitations of Flow, and it's part of the architecture behind their app, because it's built to support the Shopify scale. It doesn't have inside of Flow. It doesn't have a record of every single customer you have. It doesn't have the ability to store data and then use it later down the track. So because of that, it means there's some of the limitations around that, and that's potentially.
Your the expansion pack is Trickle. Is that the?
Yes, well, I'll squeeze a little plug in for it, but yeah, it really comes. It really comes out of having worked with merchants and seeing some of those common pain points. And so what Trickle is, it's an app that you install into your Shopify store, and then it just adds some additional triggers and actions inside of Shopify Flow, ones that aren't supported natively by Shopify. So a good example is when customer tags change. So that isn't something that's supported out of the box with Flow. So you can add these new events, and you can also have these other actions. And one of the ones that is most used by people using Trickle is the scheduling feature. So you can have an event, you can then schedule something to happen a certain amount of time afterwards. And I think I might have a good example here, which is if a customer joins a VIP program. So we're assuming that the customer, there's some system that's adding a VIP tag to a customer, we're able to schedule a trigger for the future, so that we can say after that happens, I've got in 15 seconds here, which is probably an unrealistic use case, but you could schedule that to in 2 days, in 24 hours, in 8 hours or something like that. You can schedule that, and then at a later date, a new workflow will run, and you could do some different things with that. For example, send a welcome email or something like that. So nice. that sort of delayed trigger flow is something that we find people like quite a lot.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and I don't remember what we were talking about Flow, and then he was like, yeah, it really needs a scheduling feature because of X, Y, and Z. And then I think I had just chatted with you about it, and I told him about it, and I sent him the thing, and he's like, what is this? And I go, oh yeah, it's Gavin built it and stuff. And he's like, this is exactly what I need. And he was like all excited and stuff. So it's perfect.
That's good to hear. And then I'm almost done with the plug, but the other thing that I quite like that we've added recently is the ability to add line items to orders. And so this is piggybacking off the order editing functionality that Shopify released not too long ago. But we had the idea of how would you you can use this to actually quite nicely take a deposit for a product and then collect the balance of it later, because Shopify's order editing lets you add a line item to an order and then send an invoice to a customer. So we had the idea of, if we have a particular SKU in our store which represents a deposit for an expensive thing. So let's say this is $100 deposit for $1,000 product. So a customer can go through and buy that product, and we can set up a flow that will then automatically add a particular variant, which could be the 80% balance of that order into that original order. And you can also flick off an email to the customer that is sending them an invoice for the balance. So that sort of stuff is really nice to be able to implement reasonably straightforwardly with just a couple of extra actions. And I think that's one of the nice things about Flow as well, is because it's a common system that everyone else in the Shopify ecosystem is plugging into. We can create this one action, and there are millions of different ways that could actually be used, or in combination with other apps and things like that. So it is every action, every trigger that gets added, there's an exponential addition to what's possible with it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And so if somebody wants to use Trickle, is that something that they can buy themselves? Is it only if they work with you? What does that look like?
Yeah, no, it's there's a website which I'll bring it up on screen at the moment, but we can also check in the show notes. This is the website that sort of just has the overview. It gives you a breakdown on all the different things that you can do, and how you actually install it and get started. So it's the idea is very much for it to be a tool for anyone to use. It's not in the Shopify App Store because it is a Plus only. Like, you can only really use it if you're using Shopify Flow. You can therefore only use it if you're Shopify Plus, and the App Store doesn't carry Plus only apps. But the idea is that the same way that Flow is a tool for merchants to be able to just get up and running without having to do any code, Trickle is meant to be an addition to that, which just gives you some extra features. So as a merchant, you shouldn't. These docs are ideally anything you or you need to get up and running. But of course, you can hit me up and bug me with lots of questions. Very happy to do that.
Awesome. Very cool. Let's see here. Where were we? We still going through? Are we getting?
I think we had another couple of examples. Happy to step through super quickly. Again, I think once you get the gist of it, it makes sense. But some of the other ones that we see people use, this is a really simple one, but just capturing low risk orders. So Shopify has its built-in risk evaluation tool, and it also allows you to have credit card payments or orders get paid by a credit card when you go through the store, but not actually capture the payment at the time that you go through. So you just authorize the payment.
Right.
This Shopify Flow will just look at the risk level that Shopify has evaluated on the orders, and it can capture it automatically immediately. And then it leaves the medium and the higher risk orders for you to manually review and capture. And that is a much nicer way of dealing with fraudulent orders than capturing the payment and then refunding it, because if you capture the payment and then refund it, you don't get refunded the transaction fees that you paid for the order. So just setting this up might actually be saving you, if you have a reasonably high number of fraudulent orders. It can really reduce your risk level with your payment processor, and reduce the amount of fees you're losing in the lack of those refund fees. That's a nice one.
And now this is another one, like there's different third-party fraud services, and then the Shopify's own service and stuff like that. You're dealing with the really good sized merchants, right, that are on Plus. Is this the kind of thing that makes sense, practically for them, versus just plugging in a solution that they don't have to really think too much about the details? It just kind of works.
Yeah, I think it's really going to come down to, I tend to find that merchants who have a particular a particularly good understanding of their fraud patterns, or who maybe have unique fraud patterns, benefit from a third-party app that is specifically targeted at that problem. Shopify's built-in fraud is actually, I think, really good and getting better and better and better, because they have the data across every single merchant on that platform. So that they really, in terms of the data they have access to, it is probably almost unmatched by any other single fraud provider.
Yeah, I mean, payments is like their core business, so that actually that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I think that what they have out of the box is really, really good, and it gets better. And the only downside of it is they're looking at these million merchants across the globe and looking at every single fraud signal. So they're really looking at it across a huge range of merchants. So if you are a merchant that has a specific, say you have a specific problem with friendly fraud in the US versus stolen credit card numbers coming from Indonesia, maybe there are subtle differences in the type of fraud protection you need particularly. And in that case, perhaps it's worth talking to, and if you have a particular fraud problem on your store, it's worth talking to the third-party apps and seeing if there's something they have that can help your specific situation. But almost always my recommendation is, unless you're coming into it with an existing fraud provider, or you need something, look at the Shopify fraud, let it do its job, and then if you're seeing a high incidence of fraud, then it's worth digging into it. But it's pretty good out of the box. Right.
And so Shopify does not, by default, refund you the transaction fees. I think that, it's funny. I think Stripe did that for the longest time. And I remember them at one point changing that, or at least I saw them announce that they changed it. But then I noticed my own Stripe payments refunds they'd still took care of the transaction fee and the refunds for me. So I don't know if I was maybe grandfathered in.
Yeah, they did grandfather a lot of people into that. So I think that's still the case for some Stripe accounts. I don't know if they'll eventually get rid of that rule for everyone, but because Shopify Payments is built on Stripe under the hood, when Stripe brought that rule in, Shopify basically had to.
Right. Nice. Okay. Cool. I love it.
Yeah. Next up. I think. So this is the last one that I had to talk through, but this is another common one. It is just for merchants that want to flag particular types of orders. So, and a common use case we see is when you've got a particular shipping method that's like express, and just having a system in place to really flag that with the warehouse management system or the team in the warehouse. So, for example, if an order is created and there's a shipping line that is express, or whatever the titles of your express shipping options are, you can add a tag to the order, and often order tags will flow through into an external work management system. So maybe you can have a rule inside of your warehouse system that says, if you have this tag, then we put it in red, we make sure we know it's a high priority. And then alternatively, we can also, and this is an example of taking two actions based on this outcome, we can also flick off an email to our warehouse team and just say, hey, heads up, you've got this express order. So yeah, just things like that. So it might be particular shipping method. It might be that it's a particular payment method. So like an afterpay order or something like that. It might be something shipping to a particular location. Anything like that you can detect and flag.
Right. And I'm also wondering with something like this, like, would it be easier to do this inside of your, ShipStation or your warehouse management software? Like, I'm sure they have similar rules for this kind of a thing. So what's the rationale doing it in Flow versus in those external systems?
Yeah, I mean, if the external system can do all of that and handle that, then that's great. I guess situations where perhaps that system doesn't have access to the data that you care about. So shipping is probably not a great example because most warehouse systems are going to be pulling in the shipping
Right,
data,
right,
but a
right.
lot of warehouse systems wouldn't be pulling in the payment method of the order. So if the external
Right.
system isn't aware of it. Another situation might be where you have multiple fulfillment systems. So we would sometimes have merchants who are using two different warehouses to fill orders that are going to different places. And so for consistency, to have one piece of logic inside of Shopify to perform that logic, and then it can apply it across or across all orders rather than having to set it up in two separate places.
Right, 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 right. I had a buddy that has an app, a post-purchase app,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to pick your brain on the fly about this use case. But basically, like for certain like Plus merchants that have ShipStation, I want to say, um, that the post purchase flow. So ShipStation is pulling. So I think the way his thing works is it edits the order after the fact. There might be a couple minute delay or something like that where it adds the post purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And ShipStation is pulling the order in too fast, so he can't get to it before ShipStation pulls it in. And I was just thinking maybe there's a way to do that with Flow.
Yeah, so I
So I was
think
curious how you might. I know I don't
order
have that much detail for you, but
yeah, no, I get that. So order editing was a great addition for merchants and a huge pain in the ass for all developers who have to deal with it because
right.
a lot of systems just have this built-in assumption that once an order is created in Shopify, that's the order. Which was the case for a very long time, and is one of the reasons that order editing took so long to get into the platform, is because there was just that assumption baked in so many places. So yeah, I mean, I don't. This would be a great situation if, for example, ShipStation had a Shopify Flow integration. I don't know if they do off the top of my head, but as an example, what you could do is not rather than ShipStation pulling directly from the order created webhook of Shopify, you could have your order created flow trigger something, and you could then have a delay using something like Trickle saying wait 20 minutes or probably less than that, depending on how long the post-purchase upsell takes. Wait 5 minutes and then notify ShipStation, hey, this is an order that you should pull into your system, and either push that order payload across or tell ShipStation, hey, can you pull this order in?
Right.
So that's kind of how you could look at solving that. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of these cases also, you talk to ShipStation in this example and say, hey, this is a problem we're experiencing, and often they'll be able to help you out with that directly. But in a lot of the cases they can't, or they just say, well, that's not a big enough use case for enough of our merchants for us to care about. And so in that case, the effort you go to set up a flow and just have a slightly different approach that's custom for your business, it's a lot less effort than saying, all right, well, we need to find a different shipping system.
Yeah.
So
that's a great example of where if they did have that built out, all of a sudden a customization like that, which would have taken custom API integration or dealing individually, is just handled. And like you said, it opens you up to exponential amounts of integration combinations and stuff like that. So that'd be cool. See if they had that. Nice. Well, thanks for walking through all that. That was cool to get a better, some better visibility into some of the specifics. I think I'm starting to wrap my head around it a little better. And it's neat, all the stuff that you can do in there. What else was I know we're a little bit over our time. You doing okay on time?
Yeah, I can stick around for a bit.
Cool. I think the last question I had, I've been thinking about performance front end, like Google Lighthouse type stuff, Core Web Vitals and stuff. And I know you deal mostly on the back end. Do you on the back end Do you look at front end performance stuff at all, or do you? Because I know like front end development, you don't really touch. Do you not really worry at all about front end optimization stuff?
I mean, I definitely used to when I was sort of starting out as a freelancer in the Shopify ecosystem. It was very much as a jack of all trades, and I did quite a bit of theme development. And to another plug, wrote a book about it at one stage. So it's definitely something that we see a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah, so performance has certainly become more of a focus for merchants. Historically, I think they were more focused on the features and functionalities and what their site looked like versus how quick it was, which I always found quite frustrating. There's now decades of research on how 1 second faster in load speed is equivalent to 3 or 4% conversion rate boost. Like it's a very significant correlation. And I think Shopify has started to address that as well, because they've realized that if they're getting a reputation for having slow themes and slow websites, even if at the end of the day it's kind of the fault with the merchants that are using the platform by just throwing a bunch of apps on or uploading 100 megabyte bitmap images and things like that, it's not a good place for them to be in. So I think that's the motivation behind them releasing the page or the site speed rank. So when you look at your theme inside your admin, you can see a number which is, hey, this is how fast your site is.
Yeah.
I don't love that approach, like just chucking a number on it, especially so the way it works, it takes the average of your Google Lighthouse score. So Google Lighthouse is a tool that gives you a number, performance number based on they look at your homepage, and then I think it's the most visited product page and the most visited collection page, aggregate that average, and then give you a number. And I have a few issues with that being their sort of approach, because there are really fast sites out there that do really well that get terrible scores. So I think I was reading the other day, Gymshark had a score of 6 out of 100. And they're a multi-billion-dollar business. So I think, and they've got.
I looked at Allbirds the other day. It's like a 9.
Yeah. So it's, and a big part of that is that Google Lighthouse is using the metrics that they know about in terms of, and the technologies that are being used to serve a site. And so a lot of that is not actually in the control of a merchant on Shopify. Shopify has its own infrastructure, its own architecture, its own way that it delivers stuff. And a lot of that isn't in a merchant's control. And the reason they're on Shopify is that they let Shopify worry about that sort of stuff. And I wouldn't necessarily say that the way that Shopify is doing it is wrong. It's just that they've got that constraint. And Google says, well, typically we see really fast sites having this other approach, therefore we mark you down a little bit. And it doesn't actually make a difference to the end customer experience. And that's really what I think is the most important thing for merchants to be caring about, is rather than looking at that number and obsessing about getting it as low as possible, it's loading up the actual device in a fresh browser on a 3G mobile and seeing, could I use this? Would I buy from this? What the actual experience is like for an end customer is the most important thing. And often you can get that without a whole bunch of data and analytics. It's good to think about these different things, and Google Lighthouse can often give you some really good tips and be like, hey, this is the low-hanging fruit to improve performance, and you can tackle that, and that's going to mean it's going to be faster for your customers. But yeah, I think it's really dangerous to be obsessing about getting your score up to 90 or anything like that when there are other things you could be doing, and there's always trade-offs.
There's always trade-offs. The core Web Vitals thing is interesting because they've boiled it down even further to these 3 specific metrics. I think it's largest contentful paint, cumulative layout shift, and first input delay. And I'm trying to better understand. I don't fully understand all the details around that, but they're really boiling it down to these metrics that impact user experience, and they're measuring the data in the field on a 28-day rolling period, actual users, what they're experiencing. So I feel like they're and also there's a pass fail. So it's not like, well, you have X out of 100 and you want to get more. There's like a very clear, you're either failing it or passing it, and almost everybody's failing it, which is it's just like in and of itself is kind of funny, because if everybody fails your test, like how meaningful is your test? But those metrics are interesting. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. They're introducing it as a ranking signal in like May. Who knows how big of a ranking signal it'll be. But it's I think a lot of people approach it the way you're describing, is like, you can only spend so much time worrying about that.
Yeah. I mean, the current Lighthouse scores are looking at things like time to first byte, so how long it takes for the first piece of data to hit your browser, which is not something a user cares about, but a user does care about when's the first time that they can actually see an image or a button on a screen. They care about, after this page starts loading, does it shift around on me? So, and that just gives you the impression of so much slowness as a user. So I think that's the sort of stuff that actually matters. So any sort of tool that measures those kind of metrics, I would much prefer over a raw Lighthouse speed.
Yeah. And actually another benefit to doing stuff in Flow, like the loyalty program example, some of those other examples, is that you've got maybe one less thing on the front end, right? Like as opposed to a loyalty thing that has a bunch of front end stuff. If you're doing that all in Flow, that's all happening really performantly in the background. That's another little benefit there as well.
Yeah, I think app developers have sort of just let front end developers take the blame for all the slowness on websites for a long time. But I think we're going to have to get a bit better about that. There are apps that you install them and they add another version of jQuery to the front end of the theme. And I've seen sites that have literally 10 different versions of jQuery loading on every single page. It's kind of just irresponsible as an app developer. So and there are techniques that you can use that you can make sure that your app is loading asynchronously, only on the pages that it needs. Don't load jQuery if it's already on the page. If you really need it, ideally, don't use jQuery at all. And there's just so many things that you can do as an app developer to make that not painful and to actually have no impact on that initial page load as well. It's not that difficult to build an app that does that. But I think, historically app developers been like, our focus is on the back end and the app stuff, and front end, whatever. I do think that needs to change.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of the nature of an app ecosystem, is that as an app developer, you're focused on the business domain you're focused on, and that's where you're creating value and stuff like that. So then there's these negative externalities that, are hard for you to worry about until they get surfaced up. And like, I think there's this new performance dashboard update that Shopify is launching in the summer, which shows a history log of when performance changes, and it shows like which app made an update and when, things like that. So I think those are going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think if you can do that, and then if in the App Store there's a way to sort of surface that information, and just, I guess, at least if there can be a little green tick that's like minimal performance impacts, I think that will force a lot of app developers to focus on it a bit. And I think the increase in headless builds as well will help with that, because app developers are going to have to be building their apps in a way that offers functionality outside of the Shopify theme context, and that has a more API sort of approach where front-end developers can choose what they want to pull in and when. So I think that'll help as well. Right.
Are you getting involved in more headless builds?
We have a number of clients that have headless stuff. I think when we build apps, we're almost always building them as we expose an API to the front end. And again, it's easier to do that if you're not a one-click install app and merchants expect it to be up and running. because everyone's theme is so different, and because we're working directly with merchants and their theme dev teams, we can sort of afford to take that approach, I guess, and build an API that we expose to the front end. But then it's up to the front end devs to actually build out what they want and call our APIs when they need that data, which leads to a much nicer experience for the customers in terms of performance. Like, you're not even touching our app until you need it.
Yeah.
But it's obviously you can't do that if you've got a one-click install app on the App Store. But I think that is going to become more and more common. So
I caught the podcast with the Shogun founder on the stuff they're doing around headless, which was super interesting, and be interesting to see where that goes. But I know we're over our time. Gavin, thank you so much. It's been fun catching up. Where's the best place for people to find you online?
On Twitter is probably the best, at Gavin Ballard. Very simple. And if you want to email me, then I'm just Gavin at gavinballard.com.